Saturday was a disaster for the Florida Gators. It was a significant step in the wrong direction for Billy Napier and company as the unit fell hard to the Kentucky Wildcats in Lexington. It was a 33-14 finish, and it really produced, all that momentum that Florida got against Tennessee, all that hype that they were, bringing in the ranking of number 22 heading into this weekend, gone, and it's likely not coming back unless something serious changes moving forward. There is some impatience surrounding the Florida program right now, and it looks as if things could be heading and spiraling very quickly. There's no too big of an intro today. The show's really going to be all meat and no veggies. Maybe one broccoli floret real quick. Like and subscribe to CARROLL'S Cadence. That's all I have to say. If you haven't already, what are we doing? But Florida was dominated really in every facet of the game on Saturday. They were beaten up and down the field by a Kentucky team that was clearly ready to go from the jump, and Florida was not. Offensively, Florida was sluggish. There were the procedural penalties, which has really plagued Florida on the road away from the swamp under Billy Napier's tenure significantly. They arose again. We saw times where Florida was, committing false starts, just having things that are within their control that Florida struggles to handle when they move away from Ben Hill Griffin Stadium. Now, elsewhere, aside from the penalties, I should say, you look at how Florida performed in a vacuum, and it wasn't what they want to do. It's not how they want to win football games. And while the other side of the football didn't necessarily help very much, considering their desired and perhaps only viable style of play, they didn't do what they needed to do to be victorious in this game, struggling to contend with Kentucky. And obviously falling behind early, being forced to play through Graham Mertz is not what Florida wants. That's not what he was brought in to do. But it's exactly what Kentucky knew they wanted to make Florida do in this contest. It's what every team that plays Florida knows, that they want Florida to have to work through their quarterback. And it's not necessarily Mertz's fault. Mertz was really good in this contest. He's overperforming relative to his preseason expectations. 25 of 30, 19 in a row to end the game. That's more than Napier and company brought him in to do. That's more than they imagined that he would do, and more than I thought he would do. Obviously, his average depth of target isn't exactly where it needs to be in the modern game, but I think that's a byproduct of how this offense operates, especially if the run game isn't going to work. I don't think it's necessarily on him. I think it's on Billy Napier. And I think that's the big thing that Florida is struggling with right now. You look at how Florida operates. If they're struggling to move away from their offensive identity, they don't know how to perform. They don't know how to play and contend with football teams if they're not being able to run the ball and control the contest. I said going into this game, all right, Florida, being a run-heavy team as they are, you cannot have Graham Mertz throw the football 30 times. You have to have a strong rushing attack, and you have to really take it to what was to this point, and probably still is now, the top rushing team in the SEC. Or the rushing defense, I should say, in the SEC, in the Kentucky Wildcats. I said Florida needed over 150 yards, likely, on the ground, and a strong day from their lead back in Trevor Etienne. Montrell Johnson's their starter. Trevor Etienne is their lead back. He is the star in that room. Florida got neither. They had 69 yards on the ground and just 29 yards on 11 attempts from that star back in Etienne in Lexington, Kentucky. And they lost as a result, and lost big. Because as Florida is forced away from their offensive identity, they're not winning football games. Like I said, they don't know how. Production and execution, sure, major factors. You have times where specifically there's a, Arliss Bordenham being young and inexperienced and not pushing his route upfield to get a yard past the marker, so Graham Mertz doesn't have to throw behind the sticks on fourth down, and really what was their last gasp to kind of provide hope for a potential comeback is, wiped away because, Arliss Bordenham makes his play 1 yard behind the sticks, gets tackled immediately, ball turns over into Kentucky's favor. They go down, kick a field goal, put it out of reach. 2-possession game turns into 3-possession game, and there's a significant swing in that time. But while that's kind of a point, it can be cast off as an execution mistake. I think play calling and just how this offense is structured is of equal, if not greater, blame. because they fall down. They fell down quickly. It was 23-0 before, you blinked and Kentucky was running all over Florida. Ray Davis was having himself a day, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But when you're down like that, usually that means you get the offense going. You get up tempo, you start moving, you start conserving time, and you start trying your hardest to put points up on the board in a fast, effective, fashion. But they didn't do that. There was a lack of urgency down multiple possessions, as we've seen before under Billy Napier. But it came this time in the second half, and it was induced primarily by those questionable play calls that did the Gators no favors in conserving any time. You had runs on 3rd and long. You had 2 route pass plays to one side of the field that limited Mertz's options in crucial situations that really disrupted Florida's flow and made it seem like they were kind of creeping their way back into the game. But in reality, even if they did have any type of surge back, they likely weren't going to be able to overcome the deficit that they did because they didn't have enough time. They didn't have the ball they weren't moving the ball fast enough to get it back with considerable time to be able to actually function by, those drives that we're talking about here. Because while Florida is performing decently offensively at times, they're still the worst SEC offense that there is this year. Statistically, Florida is the worst team in the SEC offensively. Execution is an issue. Play calling is an issue. The structure of the offense is an issue. The way this offense is built is archaic. I've said it since the offseason. I had my boss, Zach Goodall, on, and we did a full, show where we just ran through what this offense would look like in 2023. And it's eerily similar to what we said. We said if this run game does not get going, Florida's not going to win. Florida's not going to compete. It hasn't gotten going really twice in, this year, outside of Charlotte, which it's Charlotte, Utah, and Kentucky. Both are L's. Both have been losses. And while the offensive coordinator desires have been present before this contest, Saturday was the most significant example of why one is needed for this Florida team. There needs to be an injection of creativity, an injection of just putting guys in positions to succeed the way that the defense has this season. And sure, it didn't perform well on Saturday. That's well documented. That's well seen. You can go and look at how they performed on Saturday versus how they performed in the first 4 weeks of the season, and you can see that they are starkly contrasting. But this is what the Florida offense is. This wasn't a down day. Sure, this is different from what they saw when they played Tennessee, and that was a great game. Florida performed very well. They played up to their competition. There was a fire ignited beneath them, and they got that run game going. But there's a lack of creativity in this offense. And I think bringing in an offensive coordinator specifically is good for 2 reasons. I think it helps reconcile the offense because that's an obvious. It helps kind of get them going and produce in a way that not only is so one-dimensional as they are right now, but it expands their horizon to what can really be, called and what can be kind of right now the run game's their bread and butter, but it's not just their bread and butter. It's their bread and peanut butter. It's everything. It's their whole sandwich. So you have to get those different ingredients in there for an offense to function in the current game and a team to function in the current game at a high level. So helping reconcile an offense that's the worst statistically in the SEC is the obvious reason that an offensive coordinator is needed at the University of Florida right now. But it also unloads one thing off Billy Napier's plate. It's an overflowing plate that Billy Napier has right now. It's one of them big Thanksgiving plates that you carry out and you just start stacking stuff. Because there's Thanksgiving. You got to get your turkey, your ham. You got to get your mac and cheese, your mashed potatoes, your collard greens. So much more. But frickin', you just start stacking. Because you got to get as much stuff on there as possible. Coaching in college football is not a Thanksgiving plate, baby. That's not how it works. We don't do that here. he has a responsibility of being the head coach, the offensive play caller, the QB coach on game day, not to mention his responsibilities as a recruiter that he is doing after the games, especially the ones at home where he's out on the field until midnight talking to recruits, which is great. You want your head coach to be able to recruit. Billy Napier's done a very solid job, if not a great job, at recruiting the number 3 recruiting class in the 2024 cycle. He's overseeing the offense and a position while being tasked with leading this team. And the best head coaches in college football, they don't do that. They delegate. And Napier's at a point where he has to seriously consider doing that because the Florida faithful aren't the patient kind, and that's one of the things that needs to happen for him to remain seated as the head coach of the University of Florida beyond next season, beyond 6 games of next season. We're 18 games into his tenure, and there are already whispers internally about Billy Napier potentially being on his way out as early as midseason of 2024. I think that's the earliest, unless something seriously, wrong happens, unless Florida loses out this year and, their recruiting class falls apart. I think he at least gets some time with that class that he's bringing in with DJ Lagway as his quarterback. And still, that 2024 schedule is one of the toughest in the SEC, if not the nation next year. Might be the worst schedule, the hardest schedule a team has ever seen in college football. That thing is a doozy. It's a toughie. I'll tell you what, that one is a brutal schedule week in and week out. And he's not going to give away the reins this year. He said on Monday that he'll continue calling plays moving forward, and I don't think that was ever going to change in season. I think he's too process oriented, and he doesn't want to change too much in the current year, and that's just how things are. Those who thought he'd potentially hand him over, I think, were kind of wishful thinking, lying to themselves. But it is something that needs to change this offseason, and I think it does. If it doesn't, bye-bye, Billy. Defensively, on the other side of the football, it was their worst showing to date. All right. They allowed 398 yards, 329 of which were rushing, 77.2 yards per carry, and 33 points allowed, which are very different from what has been their kind of averages throughout the season. Like, you got to remember, this Florida defense coming into this contest was ranked 5th nationally in total defense on the season. They're averaging 245 yards per game and 13.5 points. But Kentucky made them look like the defense of old, the defense from 2020, 2021, 2022, that were some of the worst defenses in the country, definitely some of the worst defenses Florida football has seen ever, at least in my lifetime. And oddly enough, Kentucky's offensive success didn't necessarily come in the form we expected it to. I expected there to be some of those explosive plays that Florida has allowed at points. It's kind of been, the area Florida has been privy. I guess they've just been subject to at times. There was the 70-yarder on the first play from Utah, the long hitter over the top to start the game against Tennessee that ultimately resulted in a score the next play against Jason Marshall in coverage. But you didn't really see them just allowing teams to churn out yards each play, each series. It's the area we've all kind of expected Florida to excel in. That's the unit's calling card is their front 7. So you don't expect them to allow 329 yards on the ground. But that's what they did. Ray Davis highlighted Kentucky's dominance. We finished the day with 280 yards and 3 scores on the ground, 9 yards and a score with a swing pass through the air. And really, the Cats just muscled Florida's front around. A stout defensive line that's earned praise as one of the main reasons for Florida's bounce back in 2023 defensively under Austin Armstrong really got dragged around in the trenches by Kentucky, and it led to those holes that Davis exploited all game long, especially in the first half. And then again, a little bit in the second half on that first drive before they finally started to find some success in halting Kentucky, who at that point was just trying to park the bus. So the Gators defensive line struggled to create any push up front, whether it was a rush or a pass. The Wildcats offensive line was the opposite. They opened up those holes for Davis, and he worked them with ease, worked into the second level to, kind of give Florida's front seven trouble. And Shamar James and Scooby Williams, who have performed at a really high level on the day or on the year, they weren't what they've come to be. They weren't. Those two have been the reason, in my opinion, why Florida's defense has been as good as it has to this point. I think those two flying to the football, being sure tacklers, playing sideline to sideline was what made this defense so, productive, efficient, talented. It wasn't that on Saturday. They seemed to be one step behind in run fits, and missed tackles plagued the team on the day. It goes for the team as a whole. You saw the defensive back struggling to make stops. Jalen Kimbers, he had a few missed tackles on the opening possession. Obviously, the one that resulted in a touchdown from Ray Davis to really kick off the day and set the tone for what that game was going to be. You had, just guys missing with ball carriers when they got to the second, third levels. Obviously, up front, goes without saying. There were 19 missed tackles for the Gators on the day. 19. They'd only combined for 27 through 4 games. So that really does the best job to illustrate that this showing from Florida was riddled with all-around poor performance and execution and effort, really. And while I do think that's the case, it was a atrocious performance from that defense. 19 missed tackles is inexcusable. But I do want to say that I think there is some positive, not to take away from this contest, but that's just in a grand scheme as a whole. I do think it's an overreaction to be out on this unit to see what happened on Saturday and said, yep, that defense sucks. That defense not good anymore. That's not how that works. I understand the frustration, but we've seen 2.5 bad quarters of football from this group. One that ranked, like I said, number 5 in the land heading into this game. It's vastly improved from what it has been a season ago and really for the past 3 years as a whole. It's the best unit Florida's seen since 2019, and it's probably better than that group. So there's no ducking how bad it was on Saturday. But we make observations here on Carroll's Cadence. We don't jump to conclusions based off small sample sizes. And so I just want to tell you that the larger picture, the sample size we've seen as a whole, tells us that this is a good defense that had a bad day. That's all we can say. Any overarching opinions that you can draw from this, leave them at home. Stash them away. Hold them for a rainy day because there's still possibility that defense appears again down the road or this sends them into a spiral. But good defense that had a bad day is really what we can have, we can kind of draw right now because we'll see if it remains true moving forward. But we can't know what we saw on Saturday is a turning point for this unit because of how good it's been, how strong it's been to this point. So take a deep breath. Yes, it was bad, but the performance doesn't indicate a long-term slide. And I just wanted to kind of ease some of the frustration, some of the temperament of those who are watching Florida football and just out on the entire product completely. You want to be out on the offense? Go right ahead. You want to be out on Billy Napier as a play caller? Go right ahead. Pump the brakes on the defense. I think they'll be fine. We'll find out what they are moving forward. And to somewhat piggyback off that point, I want to cap off today's show by saying Kentucky's good, y'all. And this isn't me trying to say that this loss isn't as bad as it seems, because it's terrible. This loss is very, very bad. It's one thing to get beat, and it's another thing to get completely dominated in every facet of the game. To be out-prepared, out-coached, out-hustled, out-overpowered, outworked, outplayed. There's no duck in that reality. And I don't think, I don't want anyone to think that that's what's happening when I say this. This is about Kentucky and Kentucky alone. I'm just taking a second while I'm speaking about Mark Stoops' squad to go ahead and hand them their flowers because they deserve it. It's time to realize that the Wildcats, the team that has been the stepping stool, just a rug, a floor mat in recent years, they're no longer the cupcake opponent that teams in the SEC East can just waltz to a victory over, that can just say, yep, we got to check on that one. That's a win. Not since Stoops isn't, they're not the team that Stoops inherited. When he inherited the reins, they were a very different team. They've proven time and time again to not be that. And as much as people want to pretend Kentucky's a layup opponent every year, especially against the Gators, it's not who they are anymore. They play the Gators tough every year. They play really every team they play. They can go into a matchup against tough. So like I said, you can't chalk this one up in the preseason as a win anymore. Because if your squad doesn't show up against Kentucky, that hard-nosed physical football team that plays with an undeniable chip on your shoulder, they're going to punch you in the mouth. All right? They're going to come out quick and they're going to say, "All right, let's rock. Let's rock." Good luck contending with them. And you can forget about beating them if you're not ready to rock. Because they're going to do what they did to Florida on Saturday. They're going to show up angry. They're going to impose their will on both sides of the football. And they're going to talk to you while they do it. They're going to let you know, "Hey, we got to rock. We're here." We don't take none of that. They did it to Florida all day long. After every play, you saw it. That chip on their shoulder was huge. And it led them to that victory. They went up 23-0. You could see that they were just juiced to be out there. Mark Stoops does a great job of getting his guys ready. And they were ready. And they're going to be ready. Against Florida, against Tennessee, against Georgia, South Carolina, Vanderbilt, Missouri. Doesn't matter. They'll be ready to rock. And as a result, I'm keeping my eye on this contest against Georgia this upcoming weekend. I'm locked in. I still think the Dogs are on top in the SEC East for now, but the way they've played against South Carolina and Auburn makes me think that there's just a sliver of hope for Kentucky to steal a massive one in Athens. And if they do that, that can make things very, very weird in the Southeastern Conference this season. I think Kentucky has a really good formula for success out there in Lexington. They've shown that they can, early in the year have that home run hitting success through the air that we haven't seen from Kentucky in a long time. They've been explosive, which is new. They're averaging 37 points per game through 5 weeks. They've kind of started to find that rhythm offensively beyond just the rushing game. And there have been people who have said, "Oh, they have to do it." They don't just want to, they have to. That's the team they are now. Like they didn't say this preseason that they were going to speed things up and play more balanced because of the personnel that they had this year. There were people saying, "Oh, they don't have that true bell cow back anymore, so they got to go to the passing game. That big blue wall has some cracks in the foundation." And then in week 5, Liam Cohen got out there and said, just because I'm changing some things doesn't mean we can't still run it down your mouth, run it down your throat. Just because I've shown you we got a new dimension, we're no longer one-dimensional, doesn't mean we can't do what we're known to do. We can still run the football down your mouths if we want to. That's what he's saying. F around and find out. They'll let you know. They let Florida know in the form of 329 yards on the ground and 33 points, including a 75-yarder from Ray Davis, who was just muscling his way through tacklers all day long. They're going to try to let the big bag number 1 Georgia know between the hedges on Saturday, because this is a good football team, especially relative to their historical expectations. And that goal that they give them, people give themselves every year, I feel like it just continues getting, just move just incrementally each year. Oh, Kentucky's this year. They're an 8-win team. Oh, they can be a 9-win team. Oh, they can be a 10-win team. And Stoopsy said this offseason at SEC Media Days that it was time for Kentucky to finally get over that hump. And I think this is their best chance to do it yet. They might be Georgia's biggest challenger that the Dogs face in the regular season. I'll go on record to say that they are. So it could be very interesting this weekend in Athens. I think Georgia wins it, but I think Kentucky keeps it close, just as South Carolina and Auburn have in the last 2 out of the last 3 weeks, I should say. And while the Wildcats and Dogs get after it in Athens, the Gators will play host to the Vanderbilt Commodores in their 2023 homecoming game. I'll be previewing the Commodores through 5 weeks of the season on this channel on Wednesday. Make sure to tap into that before returning on Friday for my preview and prediction episode. Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and if you just need somewhere to kind of vent your frustrations about Florida's loss to the Wildcats, do it here in my comment section, just the Florida football program in general, but try to do so in a respectful manner so I don't have to get in there and treat it like a board or anything like that. I don't want to have to work overtime to make sure y'all are, not being buffoons. But anyways, I hope to see y'all again on Wednesday, and I hope everybody has a great week. I'm Brandon Carroll signing off from Carroll's Cadence, and I'll see all of you on Wednesday afternoon.